Now today in the shop, I'm going to try to detail out how I buff out carbon fiber parts. We're going to use some of the parts from Vlad's triple restoration that we're working on. These videos all have a V number to start with, so if you want to look up any of the other ones that are in this series, you type my name in quotation marks and a letter V, and they should all come up in sequence. Now, along with painting parts and gas tanks and all of the things that we normally do in the shop, this particular job and the Buell job require a lot of clear coating of carbon fiber parts, and that can be tricky, it can be difficult, it can be time consuming, and today I'm going to try to show the way I do it. Today I wanted to see how this was drying up out in the garage. This is ready to put back downstairs by a heating vent for a day or 2 days or whatever. Boy, that came out nice. Woo! Really nice, both of them. So this is one step we're far ahead. Now, the only problem today is it's going to be a little difficult figuring this out. We have a big windstorm predicted for today, and it's already starting to really blow out there. I hope we're not going to have any damage or anything, but I have plenty of indoor stuff to work on this triple restoration. I want to get down to the shop and get started. Now we have a pair of cardinals that come to our feeder every morning, and of course cardinals, like many birds, songbirds, mate for life. So we know this is the same pair every day, and we enjoy feeding them. But today with the wind blowing, I decided to take the feeder down, and of course then the birds eat off the windowsill. So the first thing I wanted to do after a good cup of coffee, check that fairing. It's still sitting under a heating vent. And by working on the tail tidy today instead of the fairing, it gives it one extra day to cure out and dry. Every time you can let that dry for an extra day, I feel it's just a little bit easier to buff out. This part though, this is a very challenging part for one reason. It's all angles and edges. There's no big flat surface. It's going to be very detail oriented to get this done. A lot of it's going to be done by hand, most by the buffer, but the trick is I want it to, before I do anything, I'm doing a paint test. This clear that's on there has been drying 3 days. It should be totally ready to buff. Just take some 1000 grit paper, any kind of paper actually, do a little flat spot and see that it comes off like powder, not like chewing gum. If it comes off like powder, you're ready to mix up some soapy water. Nothing sexy there. Get out some 2000 grit paper and get this job underway. And of course, every part you do is challenging in some way. And this part is challenging in the fact that it's all little angles and edges and corners. I want to be super careful not to break through on a corner, and because what will happen is I'll damage the carbon fiber and put a scar in it. Now, to be honest, this part, and I showed this to Vlad already, had several defects in the carbon that I will not be able to fix because they're underneath the original clear that came on the part. And when you go sanding down into them, you have to go back and forth like I'm doing now, back and forth. Look for little mistakes and try not to go through the clear into the carbon, or you scar the carbon and you will not be able to get rid of that scar. That's just a part of why I think sanding and clear coating carbon fiber is so labor intensive if you want to have it perfect. If you're not really concerned about it, if you just have, let's say, a fender that you want to put some clear on, but when you have a part with this shape where it's all angles, corners, edges, scoops, and you can see all the little defects that are in the part. Some of them are in the original clear that's on the part that I went over. Some of them are things that we really can't fix. There's a little nick in the carbon there that you can see right through the clear. There's some other little defects, but I know if I take my time today, and this is the whole thing in a nutshell, back and forth, this is the labor intensive part. If I couldn't put this in fast forward, this would be a 3-hour video. But going back and forth all of the corners and being very careful not to go through on the mountaintops, any of the corners, very labor intensive. And in this case, there's no substitute for just going back and forth, wiping it with a paper towel, looking at it, wiping it with a paper towel, looking at it. And when you don't see any spots that you're unhappy with, at some point in time, then you're just picking away at the final little defects. Now, I knew when I started this part it was going to be way more labor intensive, say, than doing a fairing part or something flat, because it's an intricate little part. But when it's done, it's a part that you see instantly when you look at the motorcycle. That little part that goes over the taillight. And so I really spent the extra time and effort to get this as absolutely flaw-free as I possibly could before I started buffing it out. And again, it's a small part, but it's a part that just takes a lot of time until you get it ready for the buffing. Very, very labor intensive. Now, I always like to look at the pictures I have on my computer of this motorcycle. It's an HP-2 Sport, and it's a rare bike, only 200, and Vlad has one, of course. And to get that part, I want to make sure I get the parts that you're actually going to see buffed out with the 4CR 8065, and those surfaces in particular that you see, I want to spend extra time on. Now, the 8065, the 4CR product that I use, and I've used many others, they all seem to work well. The tips that go into making this as easy as possible is always use a new pad, number one. Always shake the product up so you get the right amount of grit in there. It tends to all sink to the bottom if you let it sit on a shelf for a while. And the trick with a part like this is you have to be able to hold it. Now, all the different ways I try to hold it, and it would be really handy if you have a helper that owes you a favor, have them come over for a couple hours here and hold it for you. Well, that would be nice. But I have always tried to gear everything I do in the shop around the fact that I'm not going to have a helper. And certainly it just makes it a little more difficult, but having a helper would be a big plus here. Now, going back and forth, moving the part around, I try not to stay in one spot. And in the past, when I've tried to do this many different ways, I tried to do it like a checkerboard, like you do a fairing. But I just find going back and forth, wiping it in between, maybe every 5-10 minutes, take a look for spots that look dull or whatever. There's just no quick way that this jumps out of the can. And in this case, a lot of times I've been able to use my knee as a buck for like that part where the tail light is, or some of these angles and shapes and things that are just difficult to get. There's just no easy way to do this. Now, a lot of times, and being honest, a part like this takes longer than doing a big giant part. Like if you're buffing out a gas tank, a lot of times it's all big flat surfaces like a GS gas tank. It goes a lot quicker than a part like this. And this part consumed a whole shop day. But in the end, there were no flaws in this when I was finished with it. So I was real happy with that. And in a case like this, this is a special collector bike. And I know because I have bikes in my collection that are irreplaceable. I just can't go out and buy a new one, or I can't even get one in decent shape if I wanted it. And so having these older bikes, I treasure them. Vlad treasures them. Luciano treasures them. Now, this is the part that you think all the buffing's over with. Oh, well, everything looks good, but you take your under fluorescent lights, I get a brand new microfiber, wipe off all the extra polish and all the parts that, where it's dripped and drooled. But now I want to really carefully and slowly go over this part. Any spot I see that's a little hazy, a little dull, all of the little valleys, I want to make sure I haven't gone through on any edges at all that are going to require some kind of a touch-up. And in this case, this is just really, it really gets labor intensive, is having a little bit of the product on the end of your fingertip and getting down in all the little valleys and edges, angles. Actually, in the past, I've done whole parts like this without a buffer because you do save some time with the buffer, but this does a very nice job too. And keep in mind, the 4CR products, 8065, you could buff out if you wanted to, buff this whole thing without a buffer. And it might take an extra hour or so, but you still could do it. And the other nice thing is when a bike is assembled now, when it's not taken apart like this, you can go in by hand with the 8065 and it brings that shine right back up. And I've done it to many of my bikes that they sit over the winter In fact, some of them are going to be due for a little cleanup now. We're coming into the springtime of the year and the riding season. And just go over the whole bike by hand with 8065, and you'd be surprised how nice it looks. Put a coat of nice carnauba wax on it, and you're pretty much good for the whole summer then. But I understand a lot of people don't care. A lot of people don't do that. They don't want to do it, or they don't care. But in this case, this is a part I know because I've looked at the pictures on my computer. It's a focal part of the motorcycle. When it's really beautifully shiny and all the little edges and corners are done, it is really going to add something special to the bike. And this time you spend now, when you take it out to the first meetup of the year or the first ride, and everybody's looking at that, they're going to be looking at it and say, they're not going to see this windy day that we got blown away and whatever. Now, any little scratches, and there's still a few left on there, I'll just buff them out by hand. Because this part, I know when this part is back on the bike, it's going to be just like all of the other parts. This is a triple restoration. It's so labor intensive, I don't even think about when the job is going to end. But I do work on it almost every day, and I try to post up a video of the progress almost every day. Now, today is an example of a day that we had some really bad weather come through, and yet we were still able to get one part finalized for Vlad. He can pick this up now the next time he's here. This is his spare part. I don't know if he's going to want to do the other one. It's really up to him. What we're at a point now where this has been drying for quite a few days, and that should buff out in one day beautifully. He could pick these two parts up, and we're still waiting for the belly pan and the side fairings and the seat to come from Italy. So some parts are coming from Italy. He's got replacement parts. This is an enormous job, believe me. But there's a lesson here. And the lesson is I try to take a bite out of it every day, bite out of it every day, bite out. And it's going to go on for a long time, but every step of the way I'm trying to share the information that I find helpful or useful if you're going to do some paint restorations. And so many people have told me, and in fact our friend in Norway that's already painted his MT-09, and Stephen Walker in Australia, he's been painting wheels and whatever. It's just wonderful to hear that from other people. So I hope you've picked up some good information from this V set of videos. Now, as I said, the V set of videos all have the first letter in the title, the letter V. So if you're accessing or you want to go back and see the Buell parts or the Moto Guzzi parts or whatever, you'll be able to access all of those videos by just putting my name in quotation marks or search the channel and just put the letter V in, and they should all come up in sequence. Anyway, we are taking bites out of this every day. It's an enormous job. This is not something that's going to get done in 1 or 2 months. There's so much labor. The first time you do carbon fiber parts and you want to have that high gloss finish, you'll see how much more labor it takes to do carbon fiber than ordinary paint. And paint doesn't jump out of the can either. But we do try to share the tips. And thanks so much for watching.